These are the 5 objects that, according to St. John Paul II, are working against the prayers and blessings of Catholic women who have them in their bedrooms without knowing it. And you are going to see the difference between the 5th and most dangerous object, then the 4th object, then the 3rd, then the 2nd, all the way down to the 1st, the one that is probably already in your American bedroom right now, a mirror facing your bed while you sleep. A mirror facing your bed while you sleep creates what Pope John Paul II identified as a spiritual interruption in the place where you speak to God in your most vulnerable hours, the hours when prayer is whispered in darkness and suffering is offered in silence. Barbara Thornton, 68 years old, from Charleston, South Carolina, kept a full-length mirror directly across from her bed for 11 years, praying her rosary every night before sleep and waking with a heaviness she could never explain, until a visiting priest noticed the mirror placement and asked her to turn it around. Within 6 days, her night prayers felt different, lighter, heard. This is not superstition, but protection of the space where intercession happens in the hours when most American Catholic women are alone with God. Later in this video, we have the 3rd object, the 4th object, and the 5th and most dangerous object according to St. John Paul II. And now, the 2nd object, electronics that remain powered on through the night. This is the object Pope John Paul II warned against, not because of physical harm, but because of spiritual noise. The constant hum of connection to a world that never stops speaking, interrupting the silence where God's voice becomes clearest in the hours between night prayer and morning offering. Your bedroom is meant to be a sanctuary, the one room in your American home where the distractions of the world are left outside, where suffering is offered without distraction and intercession is made without interruption. When a television remains on standby, when a phone charges on the nightstand with notifications lighting the darkness, when a computer hums in the corner. These objects create what Pope John Paul II described as a barrier to the kind of prayer that happens in complete surrender, the prayer of a woman who has given her day to God and is now giving her rest to Him as well. Helen Carter, 71 years old, from Lansing, Michigan, kept her television on a timer through the night for comfort after her husband passed, praying for his soul every evening before the screen went dark at midnight. For 2 years, she prayed faithfully, attended daily mass, offered her loneliness as a sacrifice, and yet she told her daughter, "I feel like my prayers stop at the ceiling." Her daughter suggested unplugging everything in the bedroom except the lamp beside her bed. Helen resisted at first, fearing the silence, but on the 3rd night without the television's presence, she woke at 2 a.m. and prayed a rosary in complete darkness and stillness. She said the next morning that for the first time since her husband's death, she felt her prayer had been received. Within 3 weeks, her spiritual loneliness, the feeling that God had gone silent, lifted in a way 2 years of faithful devotion had not accomplished. Later in this video, we have the 4th object and the 5th and most dangerous object according to St. John Paul II. And now, the 3rd object, clothing left on the floor or draped over furniture. Pope John Paul II understood disorder in the bedroom as more than a physical condition. He saw it as a reflection of the soul's state in the place where prayer and rest should be united without conflict. In his apostolic letter, Rosarium Virginis Mariae, he wrote that the daily rosary is meant to bring order to the heart, to create a rhythm of meditation that draws a woman closer to the mysteries of Christ through Mary's intercession. But when the physical space where that rosary is prayed is marked by disorder, by garments left where they fell, by objects piled without intention, the mind cannot settle into the stillness required for contemplative prayer. This is not about cleanliness for its own sake, but about honoring the room where you speak to God in your most honest hours, the hours when you are too tired to pretend, too worn to perform, when your prayers are whispered through tears or offered in silence because words are not enough. Dorothy Walsh, 73 years old, from Portland, Oregon, had prayed a rosary every night for 46 years, kneeling beside her bed with the same wooden beads her mother had given her at her first communion. She was a daily Mass attendee, a Eucharistic minister, a woman whose faith was visible to everyone in her parish. But for 7 years, she had been carrying a heaviness she could not name, a feeling that her prayers were blocked, that something invisible stood between her intentions and God's hearing. Her bedroom had become a place where she dropped her clothes at the end of exhausting days, where sweaters hung over chairs and shoes gathered in corners, not from laziness, but from the fatigue of a woman who had spent her life serving others and had little left for herself. One evening after Mass, she mentioned this feeling to a Franciscan sister visiting the parish. The sister asked her, "What does your bedroom look like when you kneel to pray?" Dorothy described the disorder, embarrassed, expecting judgment. Instead, the sister said, "Pope John Paul II taught that we prepare the space where we meet God the way we prepare our hearts, with intention and reverence. Your bedroom is your chapel at night. Would you leave your chapel this way?" Dorothy went home that evening and spent 2 hours restoring order to her room, folding every garment, placing every object with care, clearing the floor and the surfaces until the room felt like a sanctuary again. That night, when she knelt to pray her rosary, she wept through the first decade because the heaviness was gone. She said later, "I had been praying in chaos for 7 years and wondering why God felt distant. He wasn't distant. I had made it impossible to hear him." Within 3 weeks, Dorothy's daughter called her for the first time in 6 months. Within 2 months, a long-time conflict with her sister began to heal. These were not coincidences, but the fruit of prayers that were finally being received without obstruction. Prayers offered in a space that had been restored to its sacred purpose. And the fifth and most dangerous object, according to St. John Paul II, is coming. And now, the fourth object: books or materials that carry content inconsistent with Catholic teaching. Pope John Paul II spent his entire pontificate defending the truth against forces that sought to dilute it, to make faith comfortable instead of transformative, to replace the demands of the gospel with messages that soothe without sanctifying. In his encyclical Veritatis Splendor, he wrote that truth is not a matter of personal preference, but a reality that exists outside of us, a reality we are called to surrender to rather than reshape according to our desires. He understood that what a woman reads in the hours before sleep shapes the landscape of her subconscious mind, the place where dreams and prayers and unspoken fears coexist without the filter of daytime reason. When a Catholic woman keeps books on her nightstand that teach ideas contrary to the faith she prays in, ideas that suggest all paths lead to God, or that suffering has no redemptive meaning, or that mercy means never naming sin, those ideas do not remain on the page. They seep into the soil of her mind and take root in the place where her prayers are formed. This is the danger Pope John Paul II identified, that many American Catholics have never considered because the books are not explicitly anti-Catholic. They are self-help books written by authors who speak of spirituality without Christ. They are novels that normalize choices the Church has always called grave. They are magazines that celebrate lives built on principles directly opposed to the gospel. And because these materials are consumed in the bedroom, in the hour before sleep, when the mind is most receptive and least defended, they work against every prayer offered in that same space. Patricia Simmons, 69 years old, from Akron, Ohio, was a woman who had raised 4 children in the faith, attended Mass every Sunday without exception, and prayed a rosary every night before bed. But for 9 years, she had felt a growing distance from God, a sense that her prayers were bouncing back unheard, that the intimacy she once felt with Christ had disappeared. She had tried novenas, she had attended healing masses, She had met with 3 different priests, but none of them had been able to explain why her prayer life felt so blocked. She was faithful, she was devout, she was doing everything the church asked, and still, the silence remained. One afternoon, she mentioned this struggle to her youngest daughter, a theology teacher at a Catholic high school. Her daughter asked if she could visit her bedroom, the place where she prayed each night. Patricia was confused, but agreed. Her daughter walked into the room and looked at the nightstand beside the bed. On it were 5 books. 2 were Catholic, books of prayers and meditations on the lives of the saints, but 3 were not. One was a book on manifesting abundance through positive thinking, a bestseller that had been recommended by a friend. Another was a novel Patricia had been reading for months, a story about a woman leaving her marriage to find herself. The third was a magazine about wellness and spirituality that presented practices from multiple religious traditions as equally valid paths to enlightenment. Patricia's daughter picked up the manifesting book and said, "Mom, this teaches that you create your own reality through your thoughts. That's the opposite of surrender to God's will. This is not compatible with what you're praying when you say the Our Father every night." Patricia tried to defend it, saying the book had helped her feel more hopeful during a difficult season. Her daughter said gently, "Hope that comes from believing you control the universe is not Christian hope. Christian hope comes from trusting that God is in control, even when everything feels out of control. You're praying surrender at night and reading self-reliance before you sleep. You're working against your own prayers." Patricia felt defensive at first, but that night, after her daughter left, she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the 3 books. She realized she had been filling the last waking moments of each day with ideas that contradicted everything she believed, and then wondering why her prayers felt powerless. She removed all 3 books from her nightstand that night. She replaced them with nothing. She would read scripture or the lives of the saints or nothing at all, just silence and prayer. Within 4 days, she woke in the middle of the night and felt the presence of God in a way she had not felt in nearly a decade. She wept in the darkness and said aloud, "You were always here. I was the one who walked away." Within 3 weeks, her youngest son, who had left the church years earlier, called her and asked if they could talk about faith. Within 2 months, a long-standing conflict with her sister, a wound that had lasted 7 years, began to heal when her sister reached out unexpectedly. These were not coincidences. These were the fruit of prayers that were no longer being obstructed by the content she consumed in the space where those prayers were offered. Louise Bennett, 66 years old, from Boise, Idaho, had kept a stack of self-help books beside her bed for years, each one promising a breakthrough that never came. After reading about Pope John Paul II's teaching on the importance of guarding what enters the mind before sleep, she removed every book that did not point directly to Christ. Within 2 weeks, her adult daughter, estranged for 5 years, sent her a letter asking for reconciliation. If you are recognizing that something you keep beside your bed may be working against the prayers you offer from that same bed, this is not condemnation, but mercy. God is showing you what has been blocking the intimacy you have been begging for. And if you are identifying the presence of any of these objects in your own bedroom right now, understanding for the first time why your faithful prayers have felt unanswered for months or years, you are not discovering failure, but receiving clarity that only comes to those who are willing to see. Pope John Paul II lived through darkness most American Catholics cannot imagine. He buried friends. He carried the weight of an entire church through decades of opposition and suffering. He prayed through pain that would have destroyed a man of lesser faith, and in the final years of his life, when his body could no longer move without assistance and his voice could barely be heard, he still prayed the full rosary every day. He still rose in the hours before dawn to meet God in the silence. He understood that the bedroom is not just a place of rest, but a place of warfare, where the soul is most vulnerable and where the prayers of the faithful must be protected from anything that would obstruct them. And now, the fifth and most dangerous object, according to St. John Paul II, jewelry or symbols worn to bed that are not sacramentals blessed by the Catholic Church. This is the object most Catholic women do not recognize as dangerous because it looks harmless, even beautiful, and because it often comes from someone they love or trust. A bracelet that promises protection through crystals, a necklace with a symbol from another spiritual tradition, a charm that was given as a gift and worn without question. These objects are not neutral. Pope John Paul II knew what many priests have forgotten, that spiritual protection is not automatic, and that wearing symbols not rooted in the authority of Christ opens doors that should remain closed in the place where you sleep and pray. This danger is the most serious because it is the most hidden. A woman can remove a mirror, unplug electronics, order her room, clear her nightstand of books that contradict her faith, and still carry into her bed every night an object that works directly against the intercession she is begging for. Margaret Hensley, 72 years old, from Richmond, Virginia, had been a faithful Catholic her entire life. Daily Mass, weekly confession, a rosary prayed every night without fail for 53 years. She had survived the loss of her husband, raised 3 children alone, carried suffering with a grace that everyone in her parish admired. But for 6 years she had felt a heaviness in her prayer life that no amount of faithfulness could lift. Her prayers felt blocked. Her petitions felt unheard. She woke every morning exhausted, as if she had not slept at all, despite going to bed at the same hour and sleeping through the night. She had seen doctors. She had tried different sleep routines. Nothing changed. One evening after daily Mass, she stayed to pray in the quiet of the empty church. A visiting priest, a missionary who had spent decades in Southeast Asia, sat down in the pew behind her. After a few minutes, he leaned forward and said quietly, "Forgive me for asking, but are you wearing something around your wrist that was not blessed by the church?" Margaret looked down at her wrist. She was wearing a thin bracelet made of black stones, each bead carved with a small symbol she did not recognize. Her daughter had brought it back from a vacation 2 years earlier, telling her it was a protection bracelet, that women in that country wore them for peace and safety. Margaret had worn it every day since, even to bed, because her daughter had given it to her and because it had felt like a loving gesture during a season when her daughter rarely called. The priest said, "Those symbols are not Christian. They come from a tradition that calls on protection from sources other than Christ. I have seen this before. A Catholic woman prays faithfully but wears an object that invites influence she does not understand. It creates confusion in the spiritual realm. Your prayers are being offered to God, but you are wearing something that acknowledges another authority. You cannot serve 2 masters, even unintentionally." Margaret felt a shock of recognition. She said, "I've been praying for my daughter for 2 years, praying that we would be close again, and nothing has changed. I've been praying for my own peace, and I wake up exhausted no matter how much I sleep. Could this bracelet be the reason?" The priest said, "Bring it to me after Mass tomorrow. I will dispose of it properly, and that night, before you sleep, bless your room with holy water and ask St. Michael to restore what was lost." Margaret went home that evening and took the bracelet off for the first time in 2 years. Her wrist felt strange without it, exposed, and she almost put it back on out of habit. But she remembered the priest's words. She placed the bracelet in a small box and brought it to him the next morning after Mass. He took it without looking at it closely and told her he would take care of it. That night, Margaret blessed her bedroom with holy water from the font at the church. She prayed the St. Michael prayer at the foot of her bed. She put on her scapular, the only object she wore to sleep now, and she prayed her rosary in the darkness. She slept through the night without waking once, something she had not done in 6 years. She woke before dawn feeling rested, light, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest while she slept. She knelt beside her bed and wept, saying aloud, "You were waiting for me to see it. You were waiting for me to remove what I had let in without knowing." Within 1 week, her daughter called her out of nowhere, asking if they could have lunch. Within 3 weeks, they had spoken more than they had in the previous 2 years combined. Within 2 months, her daughter asked her to pray with her over the phone, something she had not asked for since childhood. Margaret knew these were not coincidences. These were the direct result of prayers that were finally being received without obstruction. Prayers offered in a room that had been cleansed of everything that worked against them. The result of this story is not just Margaret's healing, but the restoration of a relationship she had been praying for with no visible fruit for 2 years. Her daughter later told her, "I don't know what happened, Mom, but I started thinking about you all the time, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt like something was pulling me back to you." That pulling was the intercession of a mother whose prayers were no longer being blocked by an object she had worn in ignorance, an object that had created confusion in the very place where her petitions were being lifted to God. Margaret said later, "I thought I was honoring my daughter by wearing the bracelet she gave me. I didn't know I was dishonoring God by wearing a symbol that had nothing to do with his protection. I had been praying for clarity for 6 years, and the moment I removed what was blocking my prayers, clarity came in less than a week. If you are wearing anything to bed that is not a sacramental, anything that was not blessed by a priest, anything that carries symbols or promises from traditions outside the church, you are inviting into your bedroom, into the place where you are most vulnerable, an influence that Pope John Paul II spent his life warning against. Scripture says in 1 Corinthians 10:21, "You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons." This is not symbolic language. This is a direct command. And when you wear jewelry or symbols to bed that call on protection from any source other than Christ, you are partaking of a table the church has always forbidden. You are asking God to hear your prayers while wearing an object that acknowledges another power. And your prayers, no matter how faithful, will feel blocked until the obstruction is removed. The 5 objects you must remove from your bedroom before praying are these: a mirror facing your bed while you sleep, creating spiritual interruption in the hours when prayer is most vulnerable. Turn the mirror around or remove it entirely. Electronics that remain powered on through the night, creating noise in the silence where God speaks clearest. Unplug everything except what is essential, and leave your phone outside the bedroom or turned completely off. Clothing left on the floor or draped over furniture, creating disorder in the space where you kneel to offer the rosary and your suffering. Restore order to your room with the same reverence you would bring to a chapel, because your bedroom is your chapel at night. Books or materials on your nightstand that carry content inconsistent with Catholic teaching, shaping your subconscious mind with ideas that contradict the prayers you offer from the same space. Remove every book that does not point you directly to Christ and replace them with Scripture, the lives of the saints, or silence. And jewelry or symbols worn to bed that are not sacramentals blessed by the Catholic Church, inviting spiritual influence that works against the intercession you are begging for. Remove every bracelet, every necklace, every charm that was not blessed by a priest, and wear only what the Church has given you for protection: your scapular, your miraculous medal, your rosary if you keep it near. Pope John Paul II himself wore his scapular every day of his life and encouraged every Catholic to do the same, understanding that sacramentals are not superstition, but the Church's provision for spiritual protection in a world where influence is not always visible. Tonight, before you sleep, go into your bedroom and verify whether any of these 5 objects are present. Start with the 5th, the jewelry or symbols you wear to bed, because this is the most dangerous and the least recognized. Remove anything that is not a sacramental blessed by the Church. Place it in a bag and bring it to your parish priest this week, asking him to dispose of it properly. Do not throw it away yourself. Do not give it to someone else. Let the church handle what was brought into your home without your full understanding. Then bless your bedroom with holy water. Bless the corners, the doorway, the space above your bed. Pray the St. Michael prayer aloud, asking for the restoration of what was lost when these objects were present, and then kneel beside your bed and pray your rosary in a room that has been restored to its sacred purpose, a room where nothing stands between your prayers and the God who has been waiting to receive them without obstruction. Pope John Paul II, who prayed through suffering most American Catholics will never experience, who offered his pain as intercession for a world that did not deserve his sacrifice, considered this protection essential, not optional. He knew that the bedroom is the battlefield where the soul is most vulnerable, and he lived his life guarding that space with the same intensity he guarded the truth. This is not about perfection, but about removing what blocks the intimacy you have been begging for. And if you are committing tonight to verify what is in your bedroom and to remove anything that should not be there, you are not making a small change, but a decision that will open your prayer life in ways you have not experienced in years. There is a woman you know who has been praying faithfully, who attends Mass every week, who does everything the church asks, and who still feels that her prayers are blocked, that her blessings are being withheld, that something is profoundly wrong, even though she cannot name it. She may be a woman from your parish who sits in the same pew every Sunday, whose face you recognize, but whose suffering you do not see. She may be your daughter or granddaughter, a young Catholic woman who is struggling spiritually and who has objects in her bedroom that you would never allow in your own, but who does not know what Pope John Paul II taught about protection and intercession. She may be your closest friend, the woman you call when you need prayer, who has been carrying this heaviness for years and who has never spoken it aloud because she fears it means she is failing God. Pass this warning to her, not as judgment, but as protection. Tell her what you have received tonight. Tell her that there are 5 objects Pope John Paul II identified as working against the prayers of Catholic women, objects that are so common in American homes that most women never question them. Tell her that removing these objects is not superstition, but obedience, not fear, but trust in the Church's wisdom. She is waiting for someone to tell her the truth. May the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit bless your bedroom tonight, the room where you have prayed in darkness and offered your suffering without knowing that something was working against every word you spoke. And may that blessing restore what has been blocked for longer than you can remember. May Pope John Paul II, who understood suffering as few saints have, who prayed through pain and silence and still trusted without wavering, intercede for you as you remove tonight what should never have been allowed into the place where you meet God in your most vulnerable hours. When these 5 objects are removed and your room is blessed and your prayers are offered in a space that has been restored to its sacred purpose, you will feel the difference in days, not months, and you will understand that God was never silent, but that something you kept without knowing stood between His voice and your hearing. What you do tonight in obedience will bear fruit you cannot see yet, but that heaven has already prepared for the moment you finally clear the space where mercy has been waiting to enter.